So I think this will be a little bit more of an open conversation. I'd love to hear a lot from the panelists here on these core questions we have here on the voting landscape today. How groups such as youth, racial minority populations generally, non-English speaking, have been engaged or engaged by either side. And then we can end with a discussion of Shelby County. So I think there's a word missing from that one. What does the voting landscape look like today?
I can start with this one. I would say that there are, for presidential elections, we have, I would say, some areas of the country, and Wisconsin is one of them, that we see a lot of voter turnout. It's gotten much better in terms of people being able to exercise their right to vote. But I would also argue that, and I think both the panelists have said, I think alluded to this, that there continues to be a lot of efforts towards voter suppression. So it might not be the poll tax, it might not be a difficult literacy test, but there are other ways in which individuals are left from, or kind of removed from the process of voting. And I think one of the ones that kind of comes up to mind immediately is one that Rob and I just participated in, which was watching what happened in the April election here in Milwaukee, where we went from over 100 voting sites to 5 in-person voting sites during a pandemic, where it became very difficult to do absentee voting. And so thinking through the ways in which our government and institutions and structures, make decisions that limit when and how people can vote, I think is still something that, happens too often. And as we think about what's going to happen in November, when we're still going to be in the middle of a pandemic, it's, I think, one of those moments where you have to ask yourself, where do people actually value, does our government, do the people in elected office value my right to vote? And how are they trying to make it easier for me? And in what ways can I fight for that, right? I think the League of Women Voters and other organizations like that are really focused on the idea that we need to continue to fight for the enfranchisement of individuals. We haven't actually been able to, get there for everybody.
One quick point. I know that one of the core strategies of voter mobilization, whether that's left, right, nonpartisan, whatever, is creating plans to vote with individual voters. And if, as you're describing, I mean, that election we had, the April election, it was down to the last minute, right? We
did the day before.
It was and so I think how disruptive the last minute, there's sort of, whether you're trying to do it or not, there's a voter suppression residue if you're yanking the rules back and forth, because people have plans to vote that, if on the day of voting doesn't look like what you're planning, you stay home, right? So,
well, and I would argue, we were talking about this during the pre-session as well. I think the confusion is, purposeful, right? There's people who are really smart who are I have no idea what I'm supposed to do, who are paying attention. And so if you're the kind of person who normally votes the day of, and, people have lots of things going on in their lives. So to not realize that you needed to 3 weeks ago send in your absentee ballot, I think is, obviously there's just a group of individuals who that particularly harms, and they tend to be younger, they tend to be people of color. And so it's this kind of swath of individuals who continually have to fight for those opportunities.
Adam, you mentioned President Obama's eulogy. And one of the key, among the many key statements he made was today the real challenge is that there's so many obstacles that it encourages folks not to partake in the voting process at all. And that is its own type of voter suppression, to make it confusing, to make it seem out of reach, to make it such that folks will sort of opt out because of the confusion, because of the challenges. That apathy, or that encouraged apathy, is a core tactic today. And there's a famous document. I don't know if you all know this one, but it said when government becomes destructive to those ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish. And when our government is intervening to our detriment, that rises to the level of human rights abuses. It's not only abuse on our civil rights, but it's a broader conversation around human rights. To what extent are we discouraged from taking part in a political process through voting, which is again the primary means by which we get to have a conversation with our elected officials. I got a puppy over here that wants to play with me.
I want to add to that to say that I would love to explore further how the young in particular, and not just the younger voter rather, perhaps has disconnected democracy from voting or politics rather. There's many of them are kind of sick of the politics that they see that's really not representing them, but and I think voting is in part connected to politics, but the bigger piece around democracy, is sort of gets left off as a result. And I really think the two have to be further merged in people's minds because younger voters are known to historically vote less often than older citizens. And so I really think we've got to merge the two further. My work with the League of Women Voters as a nonpartisan organization is really to, continue to educate. And that's important. And I guess I just wanted to switch, if it's okay, to, I just want to highlight a little feature around the Latinx voters, and I'll use the word Latinx or Latino, whichever people prefer. And that is to say, now there are estimated 32 million Latino voters in the United States. And knowing that the Latino population in the United States is, the median age is younger than most other populations. And it'll continue to be a larger part of the electorate in the future. We really have to, with all groups, figure out how to best engage them so that they do get out to vote, but understand the issues that are before them as they make their decisions around to vote. Our group with the League of Women Voters of Milwaukee County is El Comité por el Voto Latino, the Latinx voter outreach team. So we are really pouring out translated information. I would say that the majority of Latinos in Milwaukee are English speaking, but there are plenty that their primary language is Spanish. And we decided early on that regardless of the percentage, there is a code word for connection, and that is having the material provided in both languages, having it in Spanish. Su voto es su voz is something that came back out of the 1960s out of Texas. And that was to say to people, hey, your vote is your voice. And so we sort of reclaimed that here in the 2020 to say we're using that to reach out to our historical past and say presently, there is so much work to do around engaging Latinos in terms of voting. So I just want to highlight the fact that, and we think about here in current times, that our community really has to be engaged regardless of race, gender. We really have to get out and support one another to understand what's involved in voting. So I'm really pleased that the League is involved in this, but they're involved with all communities to get out the vote and to provide forums for discussion around, what does democracy look like?
Can we take, Ben shared with us one of the questions that was posed from Bethany Perkins on Facebook. And I think you touched on a little bit in your last comments there, but Bethany points out, based on the fact that the propaganda we were looking at feels so relevant today, what do you say to change the mind of a citizen who doesn't feel their vote could possibly change anything? Because if it could, it would have been changed by now. So that's maybe a different isotope of the question you were just discussing, that, like frankly, yeah, when people are apathetic or indifferent, I feel like a lot of times that's rooted in sanity. And so how do you compel someone like that, who I think is taking what I think is a really logical, logical point of view of saying, well, if it's this messed up, if I use, the logic of just, regression and go backwards, what's the point of me getting involved today?
Let me start with that, because I'm going to respond using some of the research Paru and I have done on the voter ID laws. There's a case out of Indiana which sets in motion and provides the legal precedent for voter ID laws. And many of these policies are, as Paru mentioned earlier, colorblind. However, in the state of Indiana, out of which this case arises, from 1990 to 2000, the Latino population in the state had increased by several hundred thousand. And while that voter ID law was indeed colorblind, it was clearly intended to attend to the emerging population of Latino voters. It was clearly intended to attack and restrict those voting options and access to the ballot box. And my response to that question is, if indeed that we know now for certain that these attacks on voting are designed and intended to undermine democracy, that should piss people off enough to stay focused in the process, because these efforts are designed to limit our democratic exchange and our democratic voice, our voice in what democracy is really supposed to mean. And these laws are specifically targeted in such a way to really and truly maintain a level of white supremacy such that Latino and Black voters continually lose their political voices, and their political voices then become almost muted in the face of these policies. And so my response to that question is, folks who are listening in, or folks who might stumble across these notions, you should really be pissed off. You should be angry at your political leadership, and it's largely a Republican project, but be pissed off at Democrats too, because your voice, your contribution to this experiment in democracy is valuable, and we see how important it is. And as a number of people have said, if voting wasn't important, why is it that so many folks in political power do all they can to limit your access to the voting box? If it's not important, why is there so many mechanisms designed to restrict your options and your access?
Thank you. That's good.
All right, this is a competition now. Who's got the best statement to someone? Why they should go?
And another thing, Adam.
You had your chance, Rob. It's Faru's time.
Well, I was just going to add, Rob reminded me of the time that we were poll watching in 2012. There were definitely young people there who were out because they were told they can't vote. And they were like, I think there is that mobilization factor of being, like told you can't do that, and feeling like, hey, you can't, you can't take that right away from me. And I think about that video of John Lewis, and I mean, people have literally sacrificed their lives to get us to this place now. So I would hope that young people, I understand, I feel the same apathy, I think, as others. I think it's not just young people who feel this moment of what's going on and how am I going to make a difference. But I think, I think to have a little bit of a long view and hope that together, we can make, I guess there are important changes that are being made. And I study mostly state and local government. And I think about the number of women and women of color and people of color running for office at that level. And I am excited because I think there is going to be some significant change in those spaces. And so those names are on those ballots too. So it's not just about, who's running for president, but these things really, I think, matter in your day-to-day life in ways that, decide like how much tuition you're going to pay and things like that. And so you want to be involved if you're a young person and making and being part of that decision making.
Yeah, I think I agree. You know that there are reasons to be hopeful with what we're seeing with our young people. I think there is also a lot of apathy with our young people, and not just our young people, and I think there's kind of a narrow view about their role. And I think for educators, our role is to expand that so that they see a much broader, a bigger picture, that historical picture, which is, being offered today. And then I think when you have that broader context, you're saying, okay, this isn't about just this particular vote. I'm going to vote for this candidate that is the lesser of two evils. And, I won't vote or I will vote, but I'm not happy about it. But expand it to, there's a lot more involved here. And so, yes, I am doing this, with holding my nose, but there's a bigger picture that I am supporting as a result of this.
I think one tactic that I've been seeing lately that's really sophisticated and kind of quiet, Black Leaders Organizing Community has been hosting forums with people, but that also just get into what are the basics of some of the down ballot jobs that are done. Like when you get that ballot and you see Register of Deeds or you see, comptroller, it's almost like a joke. But when you start learning about what those things do, it's like, whoa, like that's actually really important. And then I think to accompany that, Liberate MKE, which is another local group that's working, they've started finding entry points for people to start influencing these civic processes and made their voice heard directly within budgetary processes. So I think maybe that's so I guess in some ways, yes, the winds of apathy are strong, but in a weird way, because so many people have been left out of civic processes for so long, there's actually that your voice can be that much louder, when you start using it. It's because there's been this atrophy of the civic muscle, now it doesn't require that much muscle to win the arm wrestling match. So
well, and Adam, you bring up a good point with Block and Liberate MKE and all voting is local, League of Women Voters, ACLU. What I'm most excited by is the fact that so many of these groups are working at a grassroots level. I mean, you have folks in the spirit of Freedom Summer and other eras where we saw that grassroots mobilization. We now have, I think, more so than ever, a time ever that I've witnessed, a population of folks who are educated not only about presidential elections, but state and local elections. And that's because of the grassroots education and the grassroots mobilization that's happening. That can't be overstated in terms of its importance, that in between elections, folks are knocking on doors and raising awareness and educating. It's an ongoing civic process. And, it's civic education in its purest sense, So thanks to those organizations. Right on. We need that.
I mean, that even too, just to that point, it's a part of voting where I think my last aldermanic election was decided by less than 100 votes.
Right.
So if someone says,
very close.
Yeah, especially the lower local ones, right? Your supervisors, your aldermen, sometimes you can be the vote, or you could be close, right. Or even if you talk to 5 of your friends, you can make a big influence. So we've been moving through a lot of different spaces. Are there any, just for Eloisa and Paru, I just wanted to offer to you both, this has been sort of a wide-ranging conversation through history and in the present. Are there other sort of core ideas that center your work that you do in the community that you'd want to share with people that you feel like they really need to know sitting in this moment?
Well, I know that that we have I feel that with the Latinx community, it's neglected until it's election time overall, and that the more we have an ongoing relationship with the different communities bilingually, being culturally competent in our approaches is going to better engage the Latino voter. And so just want to highlight the fact that we have a lot more information in Spanish by the League of Women Voters available to the community, and it's statewide, so please make use of that. So I think that that's part of it. The other thing is that I really think I'm looking for opportunities to really connect with the Gen Z population and to help them to navigate the electoral process. I don't know fully how to do that, and I know that there's been plenty of research out there to figure that out too. There's a lot of surveys where we're beginning to understand it. The other thing to mention is, we're in the midst of this pandemic, and we had to do things differently to reach people. Talk about grassroots. Our grassroots was going out to the community, community by community working, and now we're doing it more virtually. And that was quite a, talk about slamming on the brakes and doing something different. Holy cow. I mean, a number of us didn't even know how to use Zoom. And that kind of reflects our age. I just talked about myself. How to reach people. And so we have to figure out new ways to reach people, especially our young people, and how to do that. I think it's so critical.
As a millennial that struggles to understand Gen Z, I'm sure someone's going to come up with a TikTok the vote campaign that will be so lame that it'll make voting cool.
I agree. I hope so.
My neighbor's dog, it's my buddy Toby over here, but my neighbor's back in, and she's chronicling the confusion that we just talked about. And again, this is an informed voter. And when she saw that we were on the webinar, we had a short conversation when I muted about these very issues, the exact thing we're talking about. Here's a very educated and engaged citizen who is still trying to figure out the mechanics of our voting process. Yeah. Yes. And it brings us back to President Obama's eulogy again. Like these are practices and mechanisms that have to be undone. And until they are undone, we have nothing at our disposal except the grassroots mobilization that Eloise is talking about. Our political leadership is failing us in the most democratic, the most significant component to the democratic process, to where folks who are engaged are still trying to figure this out. That's what we do on the webinars, real time, right?
So I say join as many organizations as you can to learn more. Adam mentioned a few organizations. This particular session right now is an opportunity for us to learn. I just, go and find the information and join and be a part of the change that we need so desperately in our community.
And don't forget, there's an election next Tuesday. So, opportunities to Adam's point, to be involved in, local races as well. And I guess I would be remiss not to encourage people who really want to see change to also consider running for office. To Rob's point earlier of protest to politics, I think I'm excited to see the Black Lives Matter activists running and winning office right now. And again, that kind of representation matters in ways, that we see kind of play out as we watch what's happening in Congress right now, but it can really make a significant difference. And there's a lot of local offices that could use highly motivated young people running for those offices and making a change. So
absolutely, it's their future. They've got to be willing to engage in the process so that they craft the future that they want.
Look up the salaries. Seriously, some of the actually not all of them. County doesn't get paid that well, but aldermen and people working in city government, they get paid pretty well.
I just want to say my last is to thank all the volunteers that are out there working to promote voter access. It's the variety of groups out there. I'm so proud of their efforts over time to really get out the vote, to educate the public, and I thank them all for doing that.
Canvassing is God's work. It's very difficult and very important and can be very effective.
Cool. It's great.
Can I just add one last screed before we finish here? I'm just sitting on my front porch. I got a package here from Amazon Prime. Sitting in August 5th of 2020, the idea that we can't organize nationwide mail-in voting when I can order 250 sleeping pills from wherever and it's delivered to my doorstep and I get several different notifications that it's coming and that I have it, and it's like, how well did they work? It's some weird dystopian science fiction futuristic world we live in that I can buy anything I want and have it in 2 days, but we're going to claim that we can't do mail-in voting, or like we don't have the infrastructure to do mail-in voting. That
Yeah,
like
that's all, like, that's a choice. That's a choice that people, like, they want you to believe that it's not possible, but they're making
Well,
that
that we
choice.
don't have a day off of work to vote in this moment is also absurd.
Rob
You know,
can buy a doggy bed for his neighbor and get it delivered in 2 days.
2 days.
But we want to imagine that we can't do mail-in voting. I mean, it's
Right.
utterly ridiculous.
And of course, all of that we know is, again, political decisions intended to limit those who engage in the political process
Exactly.
in a so-called democracy.